The sun had not yet risen over the plains of Cannae. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and a palpable, almost tangible fear that crept into the bones of over 80,000 Roman soldiers. They stood rigid, shields locked, spears at the ready, unaware that death lurked closer than they could imagine, an invisible wave ready to crash over them. Across the field, Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who had crossed the Alps with war elephants, driven by a lifetime of enmity toward Rome, watched the enemy formation with cold calculation. He knew that within hours the legions would be surrounded, crushed and annihilated, and that history would remember this day as one of the most devastating military catastrophes ever endured by Rome. From the outset, Cannae was a deadly game of life and death. The Romans outnumbered Hannibal's force by nearly half, but battlefield control, agility, and morale were the Carthaginian commander's true weapons. Hannibal's soldiers, though fewer, moved with precision as if parts of a single, living entity, ready to bend, twist, and envelop their enemies in a trap of deadly elegance. Each unit knew its role, each maneuver was rehearsed in thought if not in action, and every soldier trusted the mind behind the plan more than the ground beneath their feet. From the surrounding hills, villagers watched nervously as columns of men stretched across the plain. Horses stamped and whinnied, banners fluttered violently in the morning breeze, and the earth trembled under the weight of armor-clad legions. The scene was terrifyingly beautiful, a living chessboard where one wrong move could mean total annihilation. And on this board, Hannibal held all the pieces in his mind, orchestrating a plan that would strike fear into Rome itself. A strategy so brilliant that even the mightiest army of the Mediterranean could be crushed under its weight. As the first light of dawn touched the plains, shadows of men and horses flickered across the uneven terrain. The clinking of bronze armor, the distant neighing of horses, and the murmurs of soldiers created a tense symphony, signaling that the stage was set for a clash that would alter the course of the Second Punic War forever. Questions hung in the air. How could a smaller force destroy an army almost twice its size? Could Rome survive the genius of Hannibal, or would this day mark the beginning of the Republic's darkest hour? Every heartbeat, every step forward, every tightening grip on a spear brought both sides closer to catastrophe. The wind carried the scent of dust and fear across the field, and the distant hills seemed to lean in, bearing witness to the impending storm. This was Cannae, the battlefield where courage and strategy would collide, where a smaller army would challenge the might of Rome itself, and where history would be forged in blood, smoke, and unflinching brilliance. The shadow of Hannibal's march stretched across the Mediterranean long before Cannae. The Second Punic War had begun in 218 BC, a conflict born of rivalry, revenge, and ambition. Carthage, still smarting from the humiliating defeat in the First Punic War, sought to reclaim its honor and influence in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, relentless and ever-expanding, had become a threat to Carthage's economic dominance, controlling trade routes, colonies, and the loyalty of countless allies. The stage was set, a clash not just of armies, but of civilizations. News of Hannibal's audacious crossing of the Alps had sent tremors through Rome. Senators huddled in panic within the marble halls of the Senate, listening to dispatches describing a Carthaginian army of war elephants and hardened mercenaries descending from snow-capped mountains, unscathed and ready to strike. Mothers whispered prayers over trembling children, merchants shuttered shops, and scouts hurriedly mapped the enemy's advance. Rome was watching as a specter of fear approached, a general who seemed to anticipate every move, capable of turning the mightiest legions into prey. Hannibal's army was a living mosaic of cultures and experience. African heavy infantry, Iberian and Gallic warriors, Numidian cavalry that seemed almost supernatural in their speed and agility, and war elephants that carried terror as well as brute force. Each soldier bore scars of past battles. Each unit carried a story. Some had crossed frozen mountain passes. Others had marched through hostile territory for months, enduring hunger and disease. Together, they formed a disciplined yet flexible force, one that could execute maneuvers most Roman commanders would deem impossible. Rome, on the other hand, relied on numbers, structure, and centuries of military tradition. The legions were the pride of the Republic, forged in countless campaigns, disciplined to perfection, and drilled to respond to orders with near-mechanical precision. Consuls Varro and Paulus led a force of nearly 80,000 men, confident in their ability to crush Hannibal's army. But confidence can be as dangerous as overextension, and Rome's reliance on sheer mass would become its fatal flaw. The Italian allies were watching, calculating, and hesitating. Some feared Rome's fall, some considered siding with Hannibal, and some simply waited to see which way fortune would turn. Cities like Capua teetered on the edge of loyalty, their elites torn between allegiance to Rome and fear of Carthage. The psychological stakes of the coming battle were as high as the physical ones. The outcome would determine not just territory, but the fate of alliances, the morale of armies, and the perception of power across the Mediterranean. Small moments hinted at the tension. A Roman scout returned, panting and pale, reporting the swift movements of Hannibal's cavalry. A Carthaginian trumpeter blew calls across the camp, signaling readiness while the sun's first rays glinted off bronze armor. Messengers galloped through villages, spreading rumors that a day of reckoning was near. The entire theater of war, plains, hills, rivers, and cities, seemed alive, holding its breath for the storm that would descend. As August 2nd, 216 BC, approached, both armies were on a collision course with destiny. Rome believed it was about to impose order. Hannibal intended to rewrite history. Every march, every reconnaissance, every whispered prayer, every whispered instruction in the camps mattered. The dice had been cast, and the plains of Cannae were about to become the crucible in which the fates of men and empires would be tested. Dawn over the Apulian plains revealed more than light. It revealed tension. Carthaginian and Roman camps alike were alive with movement, but the energy was of two entirely different worlds. On the Roman side, legions marched in tight columns, the sound of leather sandals scraping dry earth, metal clinking against shields, and men muttering prayers to their gods echoing across the plain. Their discipline was unquestionable, their morale high. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease, a whisper of doubt that something was not quite right. Hannibal, meanwhile, moved through his camp with measured calm. He observed his men inspecting weapons, adjusting armor, whispering last-minute instructions. The Numidian cavalry pranced nervously, their hooves barely making a sound on the hard-packed soil, yet their eyes were sharp, scanning the distant Roman lines. Elephants, curious and impatient, shifted restlessly, their handlers murmuring commands to keep them calm. Every detail mattered: terrain, wind, sun, and river flow, all carefully noted by the Carthaginian general and his lieutenants. Maps scratched on wax tablets, banners fluttering in the morning breeze, scouts reporting from elevated hills. These were not mere gestures. They were the scaffolding of a master plan. Hannibal's strategy relied on subtlety, deception, and timing. His troops were not only to fight, they were to manipulate the enemy, draw them into a trap from which escape would be impossible. Soldiers whispered stories of the genius of their commander, of the day he had crossed the Alps and bested armies in terrain thought impossible. Each man carried pride, fear, and a grim understanding of the stakes. On the Roman side, Varro and Paulus debated endlessly. Varro, fiery and impatient, wanted immediate engagement, confident in the weight of numbers. Paulus, more cautious, urged delay, sensing danger in Hannibal's cunning. Soldiers felt the tension seep from their commanders into their own minds. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Units practiced maneuvers that might be necessary, though none could predict the exact horror they were about to face. The Roman infantry, armored and resolute, believed strength and discipline would be enough. Yet even among them, whispers of Hannibal's past victories spread fear, whispers of ambushes, traps, and an enemy who had never known defeat. In Hannibal's camp, psychological preparation was deliberate. Rituals, drumbeats, and speeches reinforced unity and focus. The men were reminded of what was at stake: glory, survival, and the chance to etch their names in history. Carthaginian officers moved among the ranks, adjusting formations, assigning roles, and ensuring that every man understood his place in the deadly choreography about to unfold. The army's cohesion was almost unnatural, a network of soldiers who could act independently yet move as a single entity when the time came. Even the civilians on nearby hills sensed the impending storm. Women clutched children as the distant sun illuminated rows of armored men, the glint of bronze and iron reflecting off spears and helmets. Dust rose from training drills and the movements of reconnaissance parties, carrying the scent of sweat, leather, and anticipation. Every sound seemed amplified, the rattling of shields, the neighing of horses, the bark of orders. It was a battlefield preparing itself as much as the men who would fight upon it. In the hours before engagement, both sides prepared not just physically, but mentally. Roman legions rehearsed their pride, their sense of invincibility, unaware that it would be weaponized against them. Hannibal's men rehearsed their fearlessness, understanding that control of their own minds was as vital as control of the battlefield. Each unit knew its role, the infantry in the center, the cavalry on the flanks, the reserves hidden until the moment of encirclement. The plan was elegant, brutal, and perilously dependent on timing. One misstep could unravel it entirely. By midday, the armies had moved into position, lines forming like living walls across the plains. The Aufidus River ran quietly nearby, reflecting the sunlight as if oblivious to the carnage soon to come. The air was thick with anticipation. Even the wind seemed to pause. Hannibal mounted his horse, scanning the enemy, calculating, waiting. Varro, standing at the head of the Roman right wing, tightened his grip on his spear, confidence masking apprehension. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum, counting down to the moment that would determine the fates of tens of thousands and alter the course of history forever. The stage was set. The players were ready, and the plains of Cannae, silent but charged with tension, waited for the storm. The morning sun climbed higher over Cannae, casting long shadows across the trembling Roman lines. Varro's legions advanced with the confidence of numbers, their armor glinting, shields locked, spears bristling like a forest of metal. Dust swirled beneath their feet, rising in clouds that blurred the distance between friend and foe. The air was thick with anticipation, sweat, and a faint metallic scent, the harbinger of blood yet to be shed. Hannibal's formation appeared deceptively thin at first glance. His infantry curved gently forward in a convex shape, a seemingly vulnerable bulge inviting the Roman center to push. Carthaginian cavalry flanked the wings, hidden, poised, silent as predators. From his vantage point atop a small rise, Hannibal's eyes scanned the battlefield, calculating, anticipating, orchestrating the impending chaos. One misstep, and the plan could unravel. One hesitation, and the Romans could exploit it. But Hannibal had studied them, understood them, and exploited their pride. As the Romans surged forward, the Carthaginian center began to yield gradually, retreating just enough to lure the enemy deeper. Dust swirled around the advancing legions, muffling the shouts of officers, the clatter of armor, and the pounding of hooves. Roman soldiers cheered, convinced they were breaking the enemy's line, pressing forward into what seemed like opportunity. But it was exactly what Hannibal had engineered. Every step brought them closer to encirclement. On the flanks, Numidian cavalry and Gallic horsemen circled unseen. With a sudden cry, they struck, charging into the rear of the Roman cavalry, creating panic and confusion. Horses reared and men stumbled. Roman formations wavered. The right wing, which Varro commanded, pressed forward with brutal momentum, unaware that the Carthaginian wings were closing behind them. The Roman center, deep within the convex formation, was now trapped in a tightening noose. Dust and screams mingled. Shields smashed against shields, swords clanged, and the battlefield became a roiling sea of human chaos. Individual stories surfaced amid the chaos. A young Roman centurion fought valiantly to hold a gap in the line, only to be swept aside by cavalry charging from behind. A Carthaginian infantryman, breathing hard, swung his sword with practiced precision, aware that his maneuver might decide the fate of his unit. Civilians on nearby hills screamed as they witnessed the carnage unfolding below, a nightmare made flesh. The tide of battle was not just a clash of armies, it was a maelstrom of fear, courage, confusion, and death. By midday, the Carthaginian wings had fully enveloped the Roman flanks. The center, still pushing forward, suddenly found itself completely surrounded. Spears jabbed from all sides, cavalry thundered through gaps. Roman soldiers fought back to back, yet there was no escape. Hannibal's plan had worked flawlessly. The Romans, proud and disciplined, were trapped in a living tomb, their numbers irrelevant against the choreography of death surrounding them. The scene was apocalyptic. Dust obscured the sun, the screams of the dying, the whinnying of terrified horses, the shouts of commanders, and the clash of metal created a sensory storm that could unnerve even the most seasoned soldier. Romans fell in tens of thousands. Carthaginians pressed relentlessly, disciplined and ruthless, maintaining formation and executing the encirclement with terrifying precision. Hannibal's eyes never left the battlefield, calculating the moment to commit reserves, the timing of cavalry charges, the ebb and flow of combat. By late afternoon, the battlefield was a writhing, chaotic spiral of destruction. The Roman army had ceased to function as a unit. Varro barely survived, fleeing to distant hills. Paulus was struck down, leaving command in disarray. The plains were littered with shields, broken weapons, and the bodies of soldiers from both sides, though the Carthaginian losses were minimal in comparison. Hannibal's genius had turned a tactical maneuver into a strategic catastrophe for Rome. Even after the fighting ended, the psychological shock lingered. Survivors wandered dazed, civilians wept, and rumors spread across the Italian countryside. Rome, the mighty republic, had been humiliated, and Hannibal had proven that a smaller, disciplined, and cunning force could annihilate even the largest army. The echoes of screams and the clatter of combat faded into memory. But the lesson was clear. The battle had redefined warfare, leaving the world in awe and fear of Carthaginian brilliance. The sun dipped low, casting long, blood-stained shadows over the plains of Cannae. Smoke rose from fires set to prevent looting. The wounded moaned under the care of the few surviving medics. Hannibal surveyed the battlefield from a ridge, calm and composed, knowing that the day would enter history as both a triumph and a warning. Cannae was not merely a victory. It was a masterclass in strategy, timing, and psychological warfare. And as night fell, the plain seemed to sigh with the collective memory of tens of thousands of lives, forever marking the moment when brilliance and horror collided. As night fell over the plains of Cannae, a haunting silence replaced the roar of battle. The dust that had swirled relentlessly all day now settled, clinging to blood-soaked armor, shattered shields, and the bodies of tens of thousands of Roman soldiers. Fires smoldered in the distance, and the air was thick with the metallic tang of blood mixed with the acrid scent of smoke. The once vibrant plains were now a tapestry of horror and despair. The scale of the devastation was staggering. Estimates suggest that up to 50,000, 70,000 Romans lay dead on the field, their formations shattered, their hopes obliterated. Roman survivors fled in panic, their morale crushed, stumbling across the uneven terrain, some succumbing to exhaustion, others to injuries that would surely prove fatal. The few medics and attendants moved desperately among the carnage, tending to the wounded, but their efforts were limited, and the cries of pain echoed through the darkness. Hannibal's forces, though victorious, bore their own scars. Carthaginian soldiers worked through exhaustion, gathering the dead and wounded, ensuring order in the wake of chaos. The Numidian cavalry rode slowly through the aftermath, scanning for any pockets of resistance or stragglers. Hannibal himself surveyed the field, calm yet somber, understanding that even a perfect victory could not erase the human cost of war. His men had executed a flawless strategy, but the magnitude of slaughter weighed heavily, a reminder of the brutal reality behind tactical genius. The psychological impact on Rome was profound. News of the disaster traveled quickly, carried by frightened survivors, messengers, and spies. Across the Republic, panic seized the Senate and the populace. The city of Rome itself shuddered at the thought that Hannibal, an enemy previously thought contained, had annihilated one of its most formidable armies. Allies of Rome began to waver, some contemplating defection to Carthage, others fortifying cities in anticipation of further attacks. Fear had become a weapon as effective as Hannibal's strategy itself. Civilians near Cannae were also irrevocably changed. Farmers who had watched the armies march upon the plain now returned to the aftermath, witnessing villages emptied, livestock gone, and homes abandoned in fear. Tales of heroism and horror spread among them, stories of soldiers holding their ground against overwhelming odds, families fleeing just in time, and strangers saving each other in fleeting moments of humanity amidst the carnage. These narratives would ripple through the Italian countryside for years, fueling both fear and admiration for Hannibal's audacity. For the Roman leadership, the immediate aftermath was catastrophic. Paulus had fallen in battle, and Varro's reputation was tarnished by the inability to maintain control. Surviving officers faced the enormous task of regrouping what remained of their forces, re-establishing morale, and preventing complete political collapse. Rome had suffered not only a military defeat, but a psychological one, its perceived invincibility shattered in a single, brutal engagement. Yet amid despair, the Carthaginians demonstrated discipline. They treated prisoners with strategic care, avoiding unnecessary executions that might provoke revolt or alienate potential allies. Hannibal's ability to control both his men and the aftermath highlighted not just tactical brilliance but political savvy, ensuring that victory at Cannae would strengthen Carthage's influence without turning potential allies into enemies. The plains of Cannae, scarred and silent, stood as a stark reminder of the fragility of even the most disciplined armies. The sun rose the next morning over a field transformed into a monument of human cost. The echoes of battle lingering in every footstep, in every glance, and in the collective memory of all who witnessed its devastation. The immediate aftermath was not merely a tally of dead or wounded. It was a test of resilience, a crucible for leadership, and a harrowing introduction to the stark reality of Hannibal's genius. The stage was now set for the next chapter of the Second Punic War. Rome, though battered, would not surrender. Hannibal, though victorious, faced the challenge of translating this tactical triumph into strategic conquest. And the world had seen, in horrifying clarity, that the Battle of Cannae was more than a victory. It was a psychological earthquake that reshaped the very notion of warfare in the ancient Mediterranean. The echoes of Cannae did not fade with the setting sun. They rippled across the Mediterranean, shaking Rome to its very foundations. The Republic, once confident in its invincibility, faced a stark reality. Hannibal had not only destroyed a Roman army, he had shattered the illusion of absolute Roman supremacy. Every city, every ally, every citizen now questioned the future, weighing fear against loyalty. Rome's political landscape trembled. Senators debated furiously, their voices rising and falling like the tides of panic and resolve. Some called for immediate retaliation, demanding new legions to march south and reclaim honor. Others advocated caution, fearing another ambush, another Cannae. Rome's response was the birth of the Fabian strategy, a cautious, calculated approach that avoided pitched battles, relying instead on attrition, harassment, and the slow erosion of Hannibal's strength. The strategy tested patience, morale, and political unity, but ultimately it saved the Republic from complete collapse. Across Italy, Roman allies re-evaluated their allegiances. Cities like Capua, once staunchly loyal, were seduced by Hannibal's apparent invincibility, opening their gates or negotiating neutrality. Fear and pragmatism became currency. Hannibal's victories, including Cannae, were not just military, they were psychological tools, demonstrating that loyalty could shift, that Rome could be defeated, and that a cunning commander could bend reality to his design. Carthage, emboldened by Hannibal's triumph, expected Italy to fall quickly. Yet here lay the paradox of strategic brilliance. Tactical genius on the battlefield did not automatically translate to political conquest. Hannibal faced logistical challenges, dwindling reinforcements, and a republic determined to endure despite staggering losses. Still, his reputation soared. Even in defeat, Rome learned to fear, respect, and study his methods, and generations of commanders would later dissect the genius displayed at Cannae. Economically, the aftermath of Cannae rippled through the region. Italian farmlands were disrupted, trade slowed, and communities struggled to recover from the dual impact of army movements and the destruction of local infrastructure. Rome itself faced resource shortages, its ability to levy troops temporarily hampered, and the social strain of the war beginning to show. Families mourned sons lost, estates lay abandoned, and the Republic's morale hung by a thread. Culturally and historically, Cannae became a cautionary legend. Writers, historians, and storytellers immortalized the battle, highlighting Hannibal's cunning and the vulnerability of even the mightiest armies. The Romans would remember Cannae not only as a military disaster, but as a lesson in strategy, patience, and the dangers of pride. Monuments and commemorations in later years would serve both to honor the fallen and to reinforce the enduring lesson. Discipline alone cannot counter brilliance, and even overwhelming numbers can be rendered useless by genius and audacity. Speculative what-ifs haunted generals and historians alike. What if Varro had listened to Paulus? What if Rome had delayed engagement or adopted a different formation? Could Hannibal have marched on Rome immediately after Cannae, potentially ending the Republic? These questions underscore the razor-thin margin between victory and disaster, demonstrating how Cannae was not only decisive but transformative. In the long term, the battle's lessons influenced centuries of warfare. Military thinkers, from Roman strategists to modern commanders, studied the encirclement at Cannae as a blueprint of tactical perfection. The principles of mobility, timing, and psychological manipulation, displayed with chilling clarity on that Apulian plain, transcended its era. Hannibal had demonstrated that the battlefield was as much about mind and perception as about steel and blood. By the time Rome had recovered and returned to offensive operations, the memory of Cannae lingered like a shadow over the Republic. Hannibal's victories delayed the inevitable, reshaped alliances, and forced Rome to innovate, endure, and ultimately triumph through resilience and strategy rather than sheer force. The plains of Cannae had become a crucible where military genius, human courage, and the horrors of war intertwined, leaving a legacy that would echo through history, not merely as a tale of slaughter, but as a profound testament to the consequences of brilliance, miscalculation, and the delicate balance of power. The plains of Cannae fell silent long after the last cries of battle faded, but their echoes endured through history. This was not merely a battlefield. It was a crucible where strategy, courage, fear, and fate collided with devastating clarity. Hannibal's triumph demonstrated that brilliance and audacity could overcome even overwhelming numbers, and that understanding the mind of your enemy was as vital as mastering the battlefield itself. Cannae stands as a timeless testament to the consequences of underestimating one's opponent. The Roman legions, disciplined and numerous, were undone by overconfidence, rigidity, and the failure to anticipate cunning. Hannibal, in contrast, combined psychological insight with tactical innovation, manipulating perceptions and leveraging terrain, mobility, and timing to orchestrate one of the most devastating encirclements in history. From the initial maneuver to the final sweep of his cavalry, every decision was deliberate, every action calculated, every outcome foreseen. The human dimension of Cannae is equally instructive. Soldiers fought and died not only for territory or honor, but for survival and loyalty. Leaders carried the weight of thousands of lives, understanding that their decisions would echo beyond the battlefield, shaping the fortunes of empires. Civilians bore witness to the costs of war, the fragility of life, and the profound consequences of strategic genius. These lessons transcend time, reminding us that history is not shaped solely by numbers, but by insight, courage, and the calculated mastery of circumstance. Strategically, Cannae redefined the art of warfare. The principles Hannibal applied, the use of envelopment, deception, concentration of force at decisive points, and psychological manipulation, would influence generals for millennia. From Roman commanders studying their mistakes, to Napoleon dissecting Hannibal's campaigns, to modern military tacticians, the lessons remain profoundly relevant. Preparation, adaptability, and understanding your opponent can turn the tide against even insurmountable odds. Yet Cannae also teaches restraint. Victory in battle does not guarantee strategic success. Hannibal, despite his triumph, could not march on Rome itself, and the long-term objectives of the war remained unfulfilled. The gap between tactical brilliance and strategic dominance reminds us that foresight, logistics, political acumen, and patience are as essential as battlefield ingenuity. True mastery requires vision beyond the immediate victory, a lesson as relevant to leaders today as it was to commanders in 216 BC. Finally, Cannae is a story of human endurance and the extremes of war. It challenges us to contemplate the costs of conflict, the lives lost, the families shattered, the cities shaken, and yet it also illuminates the heights of human intellect and resilience. It shows that leadership is not only about commanding forces, but about understanding, inspiring, and executing with precision in the midst of chaos. Standing on the plains today, one can almost hear the echoes, the clash of swords, the cries of the wounded, the thundering charge of cavalry, and above it all, the calm, calculating gaze of Hannibal. The battle is over, but its lessons endure. Strategy, courage, adaptability, and the human spirit can shape history, for better or for worse. Cannae was not simply a victory, it was a warning, a masterclass, and a story that resonates through the ages, reminding us that brilliance paired with resolve can leave an indelible mark on the world. The plains, once soaked with blood and smoke, are now silent. But in every strategic mind, in every study of leadership and warfare, Cannae speaks still, an eternal echo of genius, audacity, and the consequences of underestimating one's foe.